In a world shaped by prejudice and power, even the smallest moment can change everything. This is the story of Jasmine Clark, a waitress forced to play the piano as a form of mockery, only to leave the entire room in stunned silence. Her music became more than sound. It was a nocturne born from resilience and a deep longing to be truly heard. Jasmine Clark arrived in the city of Aurora with nothing but a suitcase, a keyboard stuffed in a duffel bag, and a quiet promise whispered to herself, "I won't give up on the music." She had left Memphis behind, along with her childhood bedroom, the tiny church where she learned to play piano, and the grandmother who raised her with hymns and Chopin. Aurora was different, colder, louder, indifferent. Here, dreams didn't float gently like melodies. They had to scream to be heard. By day, Jasmine waited tables at Maison de Velour, an elite restaurant that gleamed like gold, but bit like glass. She was efficient, silent, almost invisible, just the way management liked it. By night, when the restaurant emptied and the polished marble floors reflected only silence, she'd tiptoe to the grand piano in the banquet hall. There, with trembling fingers and aching feet, she poured herself into the keys, letting her soul rise out of the bruises of a long shift. No one knew, not her coworkers, not her boss. Music was her secret rebellion, her silent truth in a city that cared only about status, not sound. But something was about to change. Someone was about to notice. Saturday evening descended with a gray drizzle that painted the city streets in silver. Inside Maison de Velour, the air was already electric. Rumors flew like flocks of birds. Grayson Holt was coming. To some, he was a genius. To others, a tyrant with a black card. A tech billionaire who built his fortune before turning 35, known for his ruthless business instincts and razor-sharp tongue. Employees from restaurants he frequented spoke in hushed tones about him. He'd gotten an entire pastry chef fired over a mispronounced wine pairing. Tonight, he was expected to dine with European investors. The manager's voice crackled through the headset, frantic. "Station 4, full VIP protocol. Holt's entourage arrives in 10. Jasmine, you're on that table." Jasmine's stomach tightened. She had heard enough to know one wrong glance, one forgotten garnish, could cost her this job. Still, she nodded, tied her apron tighter, and pasted on her most neutral smile. The door opened, and in walked Grayson. He was tall, lean, and wore power like a tailored suit. His eyes scanned the room with the cold calculation of a man who never needed to ask for anything twice. When his gaze landed on Jasmine, something flickered there. Not attraction, something predatory. As she approached with the wine menu, Jasmine kept her eyes trained on the tablecloth. But Grayson had no intention of letting her slip through unnoticed. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone rich with boredom and amusement. "Jasmine Clark," she answered, steady. He smiled. It wasn't kind. "Jasmine. Sounds like a lounge singer in a smoky bar downtown." The table chuckled, a few guests sipping wine while watching the exchange like theater. Jasmine kept her composure, nodding politely. Grayson leaned back. "Tell me, Jasmine, when you're not delivering creme brulee to hedge fund managers, what do you do?" There was no right answer to that question, but she replied anyway. "I play piano, just for myself." His eyebrows rose. "A pianist?" He turned to his guests. "What are the odds?" Then louder. "You know what would elevate this evening? A little live music. Jasmine, why don't you give us a tune?" She blinked. I'm not really, this isn't nonsense," he said. "There's a piano right there. I'm sure you can manage a few notes. Unless," he smirked, "you exaggerated." The insult was clear. Laughter rippled. Jasmine felt heat crawl up her spine. He wasn't asking. He was daring her. She could have said no. Could have walked out, risked losing her job. But something in Grayson's tone made it impossible. His voice wasn't just a command. It was a public test, and every person in that restaurant was now a witness. "Go on," he said, gesturing toward the grand piano in the corner. "Let's see if you've got any magic in those fingers." Jasmine stood frozen for a beat. She glanced at her manager, who subtly nodded with eyes that pleaded, "Don't escalate this. Just play." She walked across the dining room, past tables of curious eyes and whispered comments. The polished floor seemed longer tonight, the piano farther away. When she reached it, her hands trembled. She sat down. Her reflection shimmered on the glossy black surface. She could feel her grandmother's memory beside her, whispering encouragement. Jasmine placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes, took a breath, and began. The opening notes of Clair de Lune floated gently into the air, delicate, tentative, then stronger. With each measure, she sank deeper, into her own world, into the ache of every sacrifice, every insult swallowed in silence. And as the final chord rang out, Aurora's elite sat stunned in stillness. At first there was silence. Jasmine sat frozen, hands still on the keys. Her heart pounded like a war drum in her chest. She braced herself for mockery, for someone to snicker or clap sarcastically. But then came the applause. It started with a single clap, then another, then a wave of it, genuine and thunderous. Not just polite approval, but awe. People stood. Some cheered. Jasmine could see her coworkers watching from behind the kitchen swing door, eyes wide, mouths open. Grayson Holt didn't clap at first. He sat back, one eyebrow raised, jaw set tight. Then perhaps sensing the shift in the room, the way he'd lost control of the narrative, he offered a slow, almost patronizing clap. "Well, well," he said, loud enough to be heard. "Looks like the waitress wasn't bluffing." Jasmine stood, bowed slightly, and walked back toward the kitchen, spine straight, heart racing. In that moment, she didn't care about his mockery, because for once her music had spoken louder than his arrogance. She hadn't just played for him, she had played past him. And the whole room heard it. 2 hours later, as the last guest left and the staff began cleanup, Jasmine was summoned to the back office. She walked in, still flushed from the lingering buzz of adrenaline, but the look on her manager's face wiped the glow away instantly. "Grayson called," the manager said, folding his hands. "He's not pleased." Jasmine blinked. "He made me play. I didn't. He said you were insubordinate, said your attitude was unprofessional, that you embarrassed him in front of his guests. I didn't." "It doesn't matter," the manager cut in, eyes darting to the floor. "He's threatening to pull his investment in our sister location unless we take corrective action. So what happens now? You're suspended. 1 week, no pay." Silence fell. Jasmine nodded slowly. No fight left. No use. She walked out of the office feeling like a piano key pressed down without release, still ringing, unheard. The envelope arrived 2 mornings later, hand-delivered, unsigned, tucked under her apartment door. Inside was a thick, cream-colored card embossed with gold. The handwriting was crisp, sharp. "You play well. I'm hosting a private event Friday at my penthouse. I need a pianist. 2 hours, $2,000. Attire, formal." G.H. Jasmine stared at the card. Her stomach twisted. Grayson Holt's initials felt like a brand burned into the bottom of the page. It was a trap. She knew that. The man had humiliated her, weaponized his power, then punished her for surviving it with grace. And yet, $2,000. That was 3 months' rent, a new pair of studio headphones, groceries, a train ticket home for Christmas. Her pride screamed no. Her circumstances whispered maybe. She called her grandmother that evening. The voice on the other end rasped with age, but warmth still pulsed through it. "Do it," her grandmother said, "but not for him. Do it for your music. Play like God is listening." Jasmine hung up the call and looked at her reflection in the dark window. Her eyes no longer looked afraid. They looked ready. She picked up the invitation and circled the date. Friday night arrived wrapped in velvet skies and a sharp December wind. Jasmine stepped out of the cab in front of the high-rise tower that housed Grayson Holt's penthouse. The doorman checked her name. "You're on the list," he said, handing her a guest pass like it was a backstage pass to a show she didn't ask to perform. Inside, the building glowed like a cathedral of money. Brass elevators, marble floors, hushed voices. The penthouse itself was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows revealed the city like a jewel box cracked open. Chandeliers hung like floating galaxies. Waitstaff in tuxedos glided across the floor carrying champagne and caviar. And in the center of it all, a white baby grand piano, polished to a mirror shine. Jasmine stood near the instrument, her black cocktail dress elegant but simple. She felt eyes on her, but none were as sharp as the one missing. Grayson hadn't arrived yet. A woman approached her. Late 30s, stylish, confident. "I'm Ava, Mr. Holt's event coordinator. He said you'd be the entertainment pianist," Jasmine corrected gently. Ava blinked, then smiled awkwardly. "Right, pianist. You'll begin in 10 minutes." Jasmine sat down, adjusted the bench, and waited for her cue. The first notes drifted out like warm smoke. Low jazz chords interwoven with soft melodies, improvisational but restrained. It was a piece Jasmine had written years ago, never named, never performed. Now it was armor. Guests gathered. Some sipped slowly and nodded to the rhythm. Others chatted, letting the music become part of the background. But a few, they stopped and watched. Halfway through the second piece, Jasmine felt him before she saw him. Grayson Holt. He entered with a glass of scotch and a trail of admirers. His eyes locked onto her like a hunter recognizing the prey who slipped away last time. He made his way toward the piano, leaned casually against it. "You clean up well?" he murmured. Jasmine kept playing, eyes on the keys. "Let's give them something memorable tonight, shall we?" he added. "You're not just background noise. Spice it up. Walk around. Sing, maybe. Get creative." Jasmine didn't stop playing, but her spine straightened. "I was hired to perform," she said calmly, "not to entertain your whims." Grayson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'll do what I ask. I paid for this." Jasmine's music shifted, subtle, sharper, minor chords weaving in. She didn't answer. She played. Jasmine finished the piece with a quiet resolve, letting the last note linger like a dare. Then she felt it, a hand on her shoulder. Grayson. His touch was light but full of meaning, possession, pressure. "Why don't you give us that little encore from the restaurant?" he said louder, drawing attention. "Our star pianist shouldn't be so shy." Jasmine stood, slowly, eyes turned. Guests paused their chatter. Some watched with amusement, others with uncertainty. "No," she said simply. Gasps rippled. Grayson blinked. "Excuse me?" Jasmine's voice rose, clear and steady. "I'm here as a pianist, not a prop. You don't own me. You don't own this music." A hush fell. Grayson's jaw clenched. But before he could respond, someone moved from the crowd. A man in his 50s, silver hair, dark suit, and quiet presence. He stepped forward with a business card. "That was the most honest performance I've heard in years," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "My name is Elias Monroe. I manage independent recording artists. If you're serious about music, call me." He placed the card on the piano. Grayson stared, speechless. Jasmine smiled, not at him, at the keys. Then she sat back down and began to play again. The applause from Elias Monroe's endorsement had barely faded when Jasmine noticed Grayson's jaw clench. He stood still, a forced smile on his face, then vanished into the crowd like a storm cloud being pulled out to sea. She continued playing. The rest of the evening passed like a dream. Guests approaching her with compliments, some even asking if she had a website or album. Jasmine could barely absorb it all. Her hands still tingled from adrenaline. Her heart thumped like a second metronome in her chest. When her final note lingered into silence, she bowed softly and stepped away from the piano. At the elevator, Elias was waiting. "That fire in your playing," he said. "I haven't heard something that honest in years." Jasmine blinked. "You really think so?" Elias handed her a card. "My studio's called Studio 16. Come Monday, let's talk." The elevator doors closed behind her, and Jasmine finally smiled. A real smile. Not the kind you wear for customers, but the kind born of quiet victory. Someone had seen her, not for what she could be used for, but for what she already was. But deep down, she knew one thing with certainty. Grayson Holt wasn't finished. 2 days later, Jasmine got a message from her manager. "We need to talk." Her heart dipped. She thought, maybe they're reinstating me. But when she entered the office, the atmosphere was cold. Her manager looked at her with tired eyes. "We've received a formal complaint," he began, From Mr. Holt, he said your behavior at his event was unprofessional. He's threatening to cut ties with our investor group if we keep you on staff. Jasmine's breath caught. That's not what happened. He humiliated me. I defended myself. I believe you, he said softly. But this is bigger than just you or me. He owns 12% of the parent company. The board's worried. So I'm being fired? Not officially. We'll process it as a voluntary resignation. You'll get a small severance, and it won't follow you. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she walked out with her folded uniform in her arms, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. But the silence inside her was deafening. Grayson hadn't broken her spirit, but he had tried to erase her place in the world. That night, she stared at the ceiling and promised herself one thing. He would not write her ending. Monday morning, Jasmine stood in front of a brick building with a modest sign, Studio 16. She took a breath and walked inside. Elias greeted her with warmth and a paper cup of strong black coffee. They talked for over an hour, about music, injustice, fear, and truth. Then he led her to a small studio room with warm lighting and a Yamaha upright. Play whatever you want, he said. She played the same original piece from the Penthouse. This time it wasn't a defense mechanism. It was a declaration, a liberation. When the final note faded, Elias stood silent for a moment. You've got it, he said finally. That thing you can't teach. The soul. He offered her a trial artist contract, studio time, mentorship, and help building a small demo. Jasmine's fingers trembled as she signed. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her voice. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of progress. Jasmine immersed herself in Studio 16, working with Elias and a sound engineer named Mila, who had a gentle way of pushing her best performances out of her. They recorded 3 original tracks, one a classical jazz fusion, another a gospel-rooted melody, and a third a haunting piece Jasmine called George's Hands, dedicated to her late grandmother. Between recording sessions, she practiced relentlessly, refined arrangements, and allowed herself to explore new styles. It was the first time anyone had nurtured her talent instead of trying to shape it into something commercial. Elias posted a short clip of her on the studio's social media. Within days, it gained traction. Then one afternoon, an email arrived. A jazz club in Midtown would like to offer you a Thursday night slot. She accepted on the spot. The girl who once snuck into the dining room at midnight to play in silence was about to play for a room full of people. And this time, she would play with pride. The Midtown Jazz Club was a narrow, velvet-lined space with low lighting and a loyal crowd. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and that's exactly what Jasmine needed. Her name was printed on the chalkboard sign outside. Live tonight, Jasmine Clark. For the first time, she wasn't background ambiance. She was the headliner. She wore a simple black jumpsuit and let her curls fall freely. As she stepped onto the tiny stage, she felt her palms sweat, but not from fear, from anticipation. She opened with her fusion piece, playful, rich, alive. Then she slowed it down with a melody born from her night at the Penthouse, pouring raw pain into each note. People didn't just listen, they leaned forward. After her final song, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then applause broke out, louder than she expected, fuller than she imagined. The manager approached her backstage. You're not just talented, you've got a story in your sound. He offered her a weekly residency. As Jasmine stepped into the night air, the cool breeze wrapped around her like a quiet ovation. She had once played in fear. Now she played in freedom. By her 3rd week at the club, Jasmine began recognizing faces. People returned, some bringing friends, others sitting alone in the same seat every Thursday. They watched her the way one watches falling snow or crashing waves, with reverence. One woman stopped her after a set and said, "You reminded me of who I used to be, before the world made me quiet." Jasmine was stunned. Her music had reached someone, really reached them. A blogger caught wind of her story and wrote a review titled, "The Sound of Survival, Jasmine Clark's Rise from Silence." It went semi-viral. Local news outlets shared it. And soon after, Studio 16's inbox lit up. Among the messages was one from a producer at a national public radio station. "We'd love to interview Jasmine Clark on air. live. Jasmine stared at the screen in disbelief. Once she had been told to stay in her place. Now people were inviting her to speak from center stage. The studio was small but professional. The host, a warm woman with silver braids and glasses, welcomed Jasmine with a calm smile. They spoke off air first, and the host said gently, "We don't need scandal. We just want your truth." When the red light came on, Jasmine told her story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She didn't name Grayson Holt. She didn't have to. People knew, and more importantly, they understood. She spoke about Memphis, about the late-night practice sessions, about the piano that waited like an old friend in an empty banquet hall. Then she played live, her fingers trembling only slightly. By the time she finished, the phone lines lit up. Messages poured in. "You reminded me of church mornings with my mom. Your music healed something I didn't know was broken." I had chills. Real ones. After the interview, Elias hugged her. "They heard you," he said. Jasmine exhaled. She wasn't chasing fame, but it was beginning to chase her. 1 month later, it came. An email from the prestigious Aurora New Voices Festival. "We would be honored to feature Jasmine Clark as the headliner of our new artist stage." Her heart skipped. She read it again, just to be sure. She called her grandmother that night, barely holding back tears. "We did it," Jasmine whispered. "No, baby," her grandmother replied, laughing through the phone. "You did it. I just prayed you'd remember who you are." That night, Jasmine sat at her keyboard with the stage lights still in her mind. She didn't practice. She just played. Free. Whole. Herself. 3 days before the festival, a headline flashed across Jasmine's phone. "Tech mogul Grayson Holt under federal investigation for fraud harassment." Her breath caught. She clicked. Lawsuits, investor complaints, former employees speaking out, even leaked recordings of demeaning comments that sounded painfully familiar. There were whispers he might lose everything. Jasmine didn't smile. Didn't say, he deserved it. Instead, she closed the article and stared out her window. Some storms didn't come with thunder. Some came with justice served in silence. She went back to the piano and started composing a new piece. The night of the festival, Jasmine stood behind a grand piano on the main stage, dressed in flowing white silk. The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. She began with the piece she had played that very first night, the one Grayson had mocked. But this time, she owned it. Then she transitioned into something brand new. She called it Nocturne in Silence. It was about losing your voice, about reclaiming it, about fighting not with fists, but with truth and melody. By the time she struck the final chord, the audience was standing. Some were crying. Some closed their eyes as if holding something sacred inside. Jasmine bowed, not for applause, but in gratitude. Backstage, agents and executives waited to speak with her. Hands were extended. Business cards passed. "You're what the industry's missing," one label rep said. "We'd love to sign you." But Jasmine didn't jump. She had learned not all hands help you rise. Some pull you into cages disguised as gold. She smiled. She accepted cards. But she made no promises. That night, Elias found her outside, leaning on the railing beneath the stars. "You've got them now," he said. "But don't let them hold you." She nodded. She knew better now. She would move forward, but only on her own terms. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine returned to Studio 16, not for press, but for peace. She began mentoring a young violinist named Kira, who reminded her of herself at 17, unsure, unpolished, but full of fire. Jasmine composed new songs without deadlines or expectations. Music, once a defense, was now sanctuary. One evening, she visited Maison de Velours, not as staff, but as a guest. The maitre d' recognized her. "We kept the piano tuned," he said quietly, "in case you ever wanted to come back." She smiled. Later that night, she played one quiet piece in the corner, and the entire room went silent to listen. Jasmine founded a program called Keys Unlocked, free music lessons for low-income kids. The first class had 5 students. They listened with wide eyes, fingers fumbling, but hearts open. One day, a reporter asked what success looked like to her. Jasmine answered simply, "Success is leaving the door open behind you and making sure someone else walks through." She didn't crave spotlights or magazine covers. She craved resonance. echoes that outlived her. One morning, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. You were right. I saw you as entertainment, not a person. I don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted you to know. I hear the silence now. 8 Jasmine folded it quietly and tucked it into the back of her composition journal. Not as forgiveness, but as closure. She never wrote back, because she already had. Every note was her reply. 1 year to the day since she'd been forced to play at Maison de Velour, Jasmine Clark stood on stage at a sold-out concert hall. Her grandmother was in the front row, tears already in her eyes. Jasmine closed her eyes and began to play. The final piece. The final chapter. As the last note rang through the still air, she looked up. The crowd was on its feet. Her grandmother was crying. So was she. Because Jasmine had done it. She had turned silence into symphony. And this time, every voice in the room sang with her. Jasmine's story shows us that true talent doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs the courage to rise at the right moment. Though she was belittled, mocked, and cast aside, she didn't retaliate with anger, but with resilience and honest music. In a world where the quiet are often overlooked, Jasmine proved that self-respect, passion, and persistence can turn pain into power. And sometimes silence itself is the loudest voice of all.